computer. Welcome to Ecopsychology Voices, an interview series with some of ecopsychology's luminaries. Hello, my name is Carol Koziel, and I'm the founder of the Canadian Ecopsychology Network, which is, along with Linda Bazell, hosts of this program. Today, my good friend Marcia Alexander will interview Dr. Gay Bradshaw. Marcia has a master's in divinity and depth psychology and is in pursuit of a PhD as an archetypal ecopsychologist. Welcome, Marcia.
Thank you, Carol. Is it my turn now? It's my turn. Yeah. I just wanted to start off by saying it's an absolute joy to have this opportunity to interview Gay Bradshaw. And I wanted to remind myself of your body of work and also introduce your body of work for those who aren't familiar, beginning with this particular quote from Lauren Isley, which you quote at the beginning of your book on Elephants on the Edge, when he states, one does not meet oneself until one catches the reflection from an eye other than human. And to me, Gay, the evolution or the unfolding of your work is an ever deepening and unfolding relationship with the other than human world and the deepening of the catching and the reflection of an eye. And so I look at the unfolding of your work beginning very quickly with your trip to South Africa as a scientist, with your PhD in ecology and the discovery and recognition on your part of the presence of PTSD in the lives and communities of elephants in the wild, free living elephants at that time. So it's a fundamental change or fundamental discovery of a condition that I think we used to think belonged to the human race. That sense of violence, disruption to our lives, brutality, and the psychological consequences of that. And that recognition of that led, I think, partly to your pursuit of a second PhD in psychology, which you added to your bona fides in 2005, and the uncovering, the unfolding, and the putting together of a new scientific field called transspecies psychology, or the science of sentience, which I love that, the science of sentience. The two together are wonderful, which explores the similarities of human and animal brains through shared consciousness. And out of that, in response to that, the interest in that is the founder in 2008. Is it Kerulos? I've always said Kerulos Center?
Kerulos, yes.
Okay, thank you. The Kerulos Center, which focuses on changing the world for animals, focuses in the beginning of a place of learning, of sanctuary, of advocacy, and sharing and spreading these new discoveries with the rest of the world in the hopes that the world for animals and ourselves will get better. And out of that, it's just this continual unfolding of your work in 2009 with your publication of Elephants on the Edge, What Animals Teach Us About Humanity, and the exploration of not only the disruption of their community through PTSD, but the wonderful community and communal lives that they shared in Africa, the disruption of that in circuses and in captivity here in this country, and all the implications woven together with personal stories of the who's in these communities, the who's of the elephants. And then out of that, pulling together a sense of other people's articles as you guest edited a spring journal entitled Minding the Animal Psyche, and then dove into, in 2014, the world of the child, elephant letters, the story of Billy and Connie, the story of two elephants, one raised in the wild, one that went into captivity, and the differences in their lives. So it's all this unfolding into the world of who, not the world of what. And your latest work, which I hope to have plenty of time for you to discuss, Carnivore Minds, 2017, or who these fearsome animals really are, the diving into the inner world, the actual lives and world of these 7 carnivores and the people who are in relationship with them, what they have to teach us about life and morality and sentience and relationships. So to to put it succinctly, your work raises, to name a few, issues of interconnectedness, identity, selfhood, implications for our world, a movement away from stratification or hierarchy in our world to a parallel or equalization of relationship with animals other than ourselves, to similarities in brain, the value of experience, and culture. Your work encourages, I think, a paradigm shift, a reality shift, the embrace of neuroscience and its findings, scientific findings, the recovery of our relationship with the rest of the animal world, as well as the uplifting of the value of personal experience, the valuing of those who live their lives with animals, whether in a sanctuary somewhere, in captivity, in Africa, or in the forest, the wild, or our own relationships with the animals and the other beings that like that better in our lives. So your work encourages a paradigm shift, a reality shift, the embrace of neuroscience, and recovery of the real stories and culture of animals we share this world with. Welcome to Gay Bradshaw. It is an honor to have you here.
Thank you.
So I thought what I wanted to do today was to explore, to some extent, what it means to move from a what to a who. So this is the way I wanted to start out. In an interview with Alyssa Weaver, who's the founder of SOAR, which is Southern Oregon Animal Rights Society, she asked you about your relationship with animals, how you were able to see what you saw and diagnose PTSD. And you stated, this is loosely, you stated that you couldn't answer that specifically, but you could say that you were able to step away from the lens of objectification. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to write a question to ask you. And what I wrote first was, what did you see when you stepped away from objectification? And I realized that was the wrong question. I changed it to, who did you see when you stepped away from the world of objectification? And I wondered if you would reflect on that, and also that experience that you tell about your own interaction, your own being caught by a gaze when you were 8 years old, and your experience when you went to the zoo, I think it was a zoo with your friend, and your interaction with somebody else reached out to catch you when you work with, in that moment with that chimpanzee. So could you reflect on that? On that, as well as what it means to be a who. How do you see a who instead of a what?
Well, first of all, thank you for the beautiful introduction. It's always nice to hear a reflection. Yeah, I'll just recount really, just briefly, that story that you're talking about, the chimpanzee. It was when I was growing up, and as I recount in the book, that, in fact, I will tell you something. At one point when I was writing Elephants on the Edge, I completed my dissertation at Pacifica, and I was writing this, and I found myself in my writing getting caught in this objectification, in that kind of style of thinking, writing. And so I was very frustrated with myself. And so I just sat down and said, okay, what am I doing? And this story appeared. And I had not remembered it until that day. That was many, many dog years between when I was 8 years old, I remembered it. And it was interesting because, as I'll recount later, after the elephant work, or in succession to that, I started working with chimpanzees in trauma recovery who had been victims and survivors of biomedical labs. And I had not even, during that very intense time, I had not even thought about this memory. So when I was around 8 years old, my family didn't go to zoos, but my friend's family took us to the zoo, and there was a chimpanzee exhibit as such. And this is back in sort of the old days. There wasn't a lot of safety precaution. It probably wouldn't happen today. And so people would line up, and there was a zookeeper, and they would go up there, and then he would, the zookeeper would say something like, say hello or something, and the chimpanzee would make a big smile and everything like that. And, everyone would laugh. And I, of course, I did not want to do this. I was shy and mortified being in the public eye, but I was pushed forward and I was doing it. And the chimpanzee didn't do anything. He was doing everything for someone else, but he grabbed me. And then our eyes met. That's very much the Lauren Isley quote. And I guess if I want to get back to your question of the who, my experience definitely as a child, and I think it came on later, was the social conditioning, which really creates a separated world. So there's a reality. So it's almost as if the social conditioning, contracts us as children in general. At least my experience, and I think many children's experiences, is that there is no what, there's only who. And I never even thought of a difference between a non-human and a human when I was growing up at all. And then, so it's that process of essentially, it's almost like, what is that, mitosis? You know what I mean? Where you one cell and then it breaks into two. That's almost really what I feel the experience of social conditioning of the psyche is. So in terms of my own experience of the who versus the what, very similar to if some of you are therapists or clinicians in some capacity, or when you're with someone that you really care for, you're trying to reach that person, you're trying to hear something, and when you lose your sense of self, the ego self, that with a therapist, when you're trying to meet the client, to me, that's really what it feels like to be in the who world. Where you, in fact, in the Carnivore book, I talk about that in the White Shark. The diver, his name is Fred Boy. He's a Belgian free diver, and he describes being, up very close to white sharks in the wild, and is essentially, he said, where I forget that, this guy in front of me is a white shark, and I'm a human. We're in a non-categorized, or you called it non-stratified space.
Okay, yeah, thank you. One of the reasons I wanted to ask you about that, and then that'll lead into the next question, was that in my fieldwork at Pacifica, I had a moment in my fieldwork with wolves where I was caught by a gaze, and then it was a gaze where all of that separation fell away. And in fact, I and the others there in that moment, it was like there was a reversal, like there was something to learn that I had not experienced before, an equality and a power in a relationship. And it changed my understanding of the world around me, which is one of the reasons why I'm so pulled to your work, because there was just something, like I found something that had been lost, and I wanted to rediscover that again. So thank you for that. I think in the beginning here, before we get into more specifics, it would be a good thing to probably uplift transspecies psychology and what that particular new science is all about. Specifically, because I think it's really, if I quote your quote, let me just stop for a second and just say what I want to ask you, okay? Transspecies psychology lifts up through findings in neuroscience, similarities between human and animal brains. We have, as you state in the philosophy of the Kerulos Center, quote, common capacities to think, feel, dream, aspire, and experience consciousness. The implications are enormous, paradigm changing, reality shifting, and story changing. So can you reflect on how these findings, or this new science, how these findings and subsequent recognition of PTSD, not only in free elephants, but in many other species, captive elephants, our own species, changes the story of our relationship with each other, and what the implications are for the hope for a recovery or rediscovery of what it means to share consciousness with these other beings.
Well, I'll just make a quick comment that that someone had raised a question about what's the difference or the similarities between transspecies psychology and ecopsychology. And I wouldn't say that there's differences. I would say that ecopsychology encompasses transspecies. You could look at it in the sense that transspecies psychology and our work at the Kerulos Center focuses on non-human animals, but it really encompasses all of nature, When I termed the transspecies psychology, it was really I did not think that the term or the concept would remain. I thought it would really be absorbed into psychology, specifically depth psychology, because that was entree into psychology. And it was really to bring attention to what I called nature has a face. It's a tendency to hear nature, and that's always as a, counterpoint to humans, as if, nature was like a stage upon which, that, as I describe it, a human drama is played out. So really, when I focused on transspecies psychology, I wanted to really say that psychology, psyche, the way we approach it, is not limited to the human form whatsoever. And in fact, it's a biased way, meaning in the sense, if you look at it in sort of a rigorous scholarship way or whatever, it introduces a bias, and it introduces an inaccuracy to that extent. In transspecies psychology, because I was using neurosciences, neuropsychology, really as a heuristic tool. And most of the moves in transspecies psychology and this broader, I would say, movement that in which I'm engaged is really all deconstructive. It's, it's deprivileging, it's deconstructive, it's disabling, it's DDD. It's really like I call in my use of brain science and neuropsychology really is what I call like nail polish remover, or, cleaning like Windex from this screen or from this occluded window that we've been looking through, which is what I refer to as a social conditioning, seeing these kinds of differences. And transspecies psychology is only really, again, on the other kind of a part of it, was to bring attention to the fact that this is not new. It's just that the science has been used selectively and very intentionally selectively. So all of the quote unquote data, in fact, nothing that I did was new. Nothing was I did. The whole concept of trauma, even post-traumatic stress disorder and complex PTSD, that's the foundation. All of the data and the theory that goes into human trauma and human trauma recovery, all of those things, quote unquote, psychopathology, is based on animal models. That is using rats and cats and beagles and horseshoe crabs, you name it, primates, non-human primates, as models, as surrogates for humans because of ethical and legal prohibition in terms of using humans in that way. So really, there's a whole corpus of, very conventional data and science, which is transspecies psychology. So essentially, I use that term again to bring up nature has a face. And then second was to say science is being used selectively. And that's for political, psychological, social, and economic reasons in that way.
Okay. What was that? There was something that went right along. What you're saying.
As time has gone on, when I first began with transspecies psychology, and it's very useful to use the brain scientists, the substrates, because it's hard data, right? Sort of makes people feel comfortable. And I saw that as a leverage point to be able to open dialogue, to sort of dissolve these psychological and conceptual barriers. But again, this is my own feeling, is that the neuropsychology needs to be used just as, this is my whole background actually, models are really more like, I always used to talk about like Kleenex. You use them and then you throw them away. They're just to move you forward. It's very much like the Buddha's pointing at the moon. Neuropsychology and models are the finger pointing, but they're not the moon. They're not psyche.
That was one of the really interesting things along that same line in Carnivore Minds, in the section on coyotes, where you start the whole chapter is like, in the very beginning, is a description of a psychological condition and all the symptoms and the response and all of that. And it's never brought out in the very beginning that you're talking about Amber, you're talking about a coyote. And you would think you're reading the notes on a person. And it's a wonderful way of shocking, at least for me, shocking myself out of my own preconceptions or my own what I expect to see, and then to look through that gaze, look through the eyes of what happened to Amber, through that same diagnosis and the same response, the same what happens, the brutality and the effort at healing, just a different somatic station, a different body, perhaps a different culture, but a consciousness, an ability to suffer, to think, to feel, to have a community, to be part of a world that you're torn apart from. But anyway, I thought it was a really great way to put a mirror up without it, because it was so unexpected. It was an unexpected mirror. I wasn't expecting it, so I got shocked out of my own world that I thought I knew so well. So thank you for that. I like being shocked and having other doors that I didn't expect, and to find something on the other side that just opens our worlds up even bigger. So I also wanted to ask you, in transspecies psychology, I thought the work and your founding of the Kerulos Center was actually a response to all of this learning and the effort to meet the needs of beings other than ourselves, animals, to try and restore places of sanctuary. So what I did was I took a look at the Kerulos Center, and very quickly I just wanted to refresh, just take a quick bite out of the philosophy and the values to lead into this other question about sanctuary. Okay, so when you go onto the site, www.kerulos.org, online, there is a section that details now not only the work, but the philosophy, the values, and the mission and vision that are behind the work. So let me just present this. In the philosophy, one piece of it states that the Kerulos is dedicated to the belief that the world's tribal people and their close kin, non-human animals, possess inherent rights to coexist on this earth in total freedom as codependent and inseparable equals without fear of violence inflicted from humans. We are explicitly trans-species, the understanding that humans and other animals have common capacities, again, to think, feel, dream, aspire, and experience consciousness. And out of that comes this dedication to values of interbeing. So we're interconnected. Deep listening. So we listen to and for other animals. Collaboration. We move from an I to a we and to an us. Nature-based consciousness, where we live together in ways that benefit us all, and a new understanding of the ethical integrity in our work with animals. And what I love, because to me this is so much depth psychology and coming out of James Hillman, is this emphasis on beauty, that animals have aesthetics, have beauty, and that our definition of beauty is not necessarily theirs. You know, so you look at beauty through the animal aesthetics of beings other than ourselves. So I just love that. And out of that comes your mission and vision, which is a world where animals live in dignity and freedom. And believe me, when I saw dignity and freedom, of course, it made me think of our own world in this country today, and the fight for dignity and what worth and dignity means, and what it means to live free of fear of violence. So out of that, there is a question that I have for you. Okay, here we go. The vision and mission of the Kerulos Center is a world where animals live in freedom and dignity. Today, they live in a world of human privilege and its violence. And I added this, I found a selection in Susan Griffin's Woman in Nature very quickly. There's just a little bit that she does from the perspective of what has happened to elephant matriarchs very quickly. How are we doing on time, Carol? Are we okay? Are we over? I have 5 minutes? Okay, I'll do this very quickly. This is what she said. This is from the perspective of an elephant. Now we will let the blood of our mothers sink into this earth. This is what we will do with our grieving. We will cover her wounds with mud. And at the end, the very last sentence of this is, when this kind of violence, when there's no trace left of this memory of this violence in us, will we see what we can be without this fear, without this enemy, what we are. And so the whole question in that, because I want to have time for you to get to Carnivore Minds, was just about the recovery of who we are, who elephants and other beings are, and the meaning of sanctuary, sanctuary in particular places right now, but also that projection you have of world sanctuary, what it would mean to be a world in sanctuary, living in peace together. And perhaps from that to go into Carnivore Minds and talk about the Charlie Russell, Grizzlies, and the whole format of that, and the purpose and what touched you about writing Carnivore Minds.
Well, I wanted to just tell you, you said something about beauty, and I wanted to tell you just a quick person. We live here in Southern Oregon, and we have lots of ground squirrels, and everyone considers them the bane. Part of our cabin is very old. Well, you know, not by European or even Eastern standard, but it's 150 years old, which is for the West Coast old. Anyway, ground squirrels have just taken over, and they have, you know, undermined, and everyone gets upset with their places, and they usually eradicate them in not so nice ways. and our part of our floor in our old cabin is sunk because we have a wood stove sunk. And so I was sort of on this rampage, and I just kind of went, God, they are so obnoxious, And then one day I met a squirrel named Asa, and I was sitting outside. She's actually in the first chapter. She inspired the rattlesnake chapter. Mm. And I see them. It's typically in the morning and it's typically in the evening. And they'll sit up with their hands. And they are just really enjoying the beauty of the day. Oh. There's no way. I mean, when I say I know, it's this sense of aesthetics that they really appreciate. So after the really understanding that, I just decided, this is their home too, and we'll figure it out. I did want to bring up, when you talk about Carnivore Minds and getting back to your question on the gays, there's a chapter on crocodiles. And there's a woman, you were talking about this reversal, your own experience with wolves and all. There's a woman named Val Plumwood. She's passed. She was an environmentalist and very prolific and beautiful writer. And she recounts this story. It's incredible. And I cited in there. And she talks about how she was canoeing in a river in Australia. And, she was very, sort of, bushwise and things like that. And the park fellow says, don't go down these side, streams or whatever, because that's where the saltwater crocodiles are, blah, blah, blah. So she's, canoeing along. She kind of loses track. And then she realizes she's in the wrong place. And lo and behold, she sees this, log in front of her take form into a crocodile. Anyways, it's a very dramatic, very beautiful description. But she basically, the crocodile goes chomp, and she's in this 3 times that what they call a death roll, which is the crocodile grabs you and basically pulls you under and tries to drown you and then eat you. And she was talking about this experience, like she said, all this has happened. This is 3 times. That's quite extraordinary. She did survive. She said she felt this outrage, like, I am not food. I am not a meal. And so for her, there she wrote about it. She was like going, well, why not later? When she thinking herself, like, here she is, near death. And she's like outraged. How dare you try to eat me, a human, And I think that's something, it's a very powerful story about in that way. That is that kind of privilege, that why shouldn't we be a meal? And that's really kind of the carnivore book. Statistically, being a meal or being attacked by one of these, scary beasts is very, very low. It's way out of proportion. And economic and psychological and social agendas which have promulgated this myth and continue to promulgate this myth. Again, I'll say over and over, it's a misrepresentation of science. And it's, that is really the thread. And again, I keep saying this with transspecies psychology, probably the main thread really is trying to use the hard sciences as a way to dissolve the machinery and the mechanisms which promulgate their absolute untruths. So the book has every chapter. My point of the book, really, in this sense, was to also connect with conservation, with biologists who normally, and ethologists, animal behavior, who don't, even though more recently the animal behavior and ethologists are talking about cognition and emotion, it's still kind of added on. It's not like depth psychology is, Jung's vision or Hillman, whoever's, or ecopsychology, the field of a psyche. And so that was really kind of I was trying to use this book as a portal to begin to have that dialogue. And so every chapter has kind of a theme from psychology, like attachment theory is the grisly one, and personality, the social intelligence is in the rattlesnake, etc. And again, as you brought up, this was another really important theme, is that when I was doing this, I really had not intended to write this book, but I won't get into that. And then I could have shot myself, because every chapter was like a dissertation. I am not a biologist. Facts like that stick on my head like egg on Teflon, And so I had to just really delve into the literature. And a lot of that literature is rather what we call gray literature. It's not well done, which is also a problem, because you don't get the quote. You see the power of the lens of that literature obscuring who these individuals, these carnivores really are. And what I found, though, were the people who, quote unquote, really knew, in the sense of really knew that particular species as such, are people who didn't have any formal training. Either they didn't have, quote unquote, university degrees, or if they did and they were in science, they really didn't, that wasn't their primary source of information and knowledge. And they were people who were just very present, as I mentioned earlier, in the way we might talk about a clinician, being present, presence of psyche. So what really came out of it, and this is again a very strong theme that in the organization, in terms of our internships and the development of our 2 sanctuary centers for nonviolence, is to really to cultivate, to encourage and cultivate a sense of self-competence and confidence, to know without being told about an elephant, without being told about a parrot. Now, it's, there's a lot of very good information about natural history and all that detail, but to really start to begin to trust ourselves again, using our individual experience, in a critical way. In a critical way, as we would do in psychology, looking for projections, Of course, this is, in my belief, this can really be fortified by engaging in contemplative study, whether it's meditation or whatever, but this is self-knowledge, knowledge of self. And then being able to, really, that helps clear the field to be able to hear and listen to non-human nature.
And I'll just close with, I recommend to everybody, I don't think we have time to do this, but at the very end of Carnivore Minds, there's a section, there's an ending called Pax Carnivora, and that story of culture of the sperm whale and the inclusion of the human beings who are watching this introduction of a new baby sperm whale to the members of the community, and their choice to include the humans and introduce the baby to the humans, with the adults having full knowledge of the murders of their family members in previous decades, I thought was just was one of the most beautiful things I ever read. And it was really one of those stories that opens the portal for possibilities in the future about a world sanctuary and what it might mean to recognize each other and live together. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you
very much.